Hello from QCEA. We have been exploring different perspective and experience on human rights, peace and equality. And today I am lucky to be with Madeleine Kennedy-MacFoy. Madeleine, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your journey?
Hi, Kékéli. So I'm Madeleine, and I currently work for Education International, which is the Global Federation of Teachers' Trade Unions. That's the world's biggest federation of trade unions that brings together organizations that represent teachers, education support personnel, basically education workers all over the world. And I work on gender equality issues at EI. Prior to joining EI, I worked at the University of Oslo in the Center for Gender Research. And my work there was focusing on the contributions of women's organizations, so-called minority women's organizations in European contexts. I did a comparative study of organizations in the UK, in Norway, and in Belgium. And I was interested in understanding what contributions they'd made to the advancement of women's citizenship. It was part of a big European project. And prior to that, I was working for an organization that focused on African women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. It was an African women-led organization that was based in London, but all the partners were on the continent. That was really very interesting and very important work because it was happening at a time when they were just beginning, the women's movements, women's organizations on the continent and in the diaspora working on those issues were just beginning to kind of build the strong links between them so that they could be speaking with one voice as much as possible, or at least working more consistently and more effectively with each other. So it's been a kind of varied path. But I think what's been consistent throughout is an interest in social justice, and particularly looking at the inequalities between men and women, between the so-called global north and south, with a specific focus on the African continent, because I'm a daughter of the African diaspora.
You just mentioned in your journey that you've been working on who, I guess, groups that are considered minorities or at the margins, but sometimes despite being minorities, what few things are you carrying with you from those experiences?
Yeah, very much the struggle to have your voice heard. So those women in Black women's organizations since the 70s, really, in the UK at least, have been fighting for their own space and for the recognition of the issues that they want to put on the table. You know, it's a story that mirrors what we know from the United States as well, that the women's movements, the mainstream women's movements, whatever advances, demands, progress they made, have remained quite one-dimensional. So whether the critique was made explicitly in research, as we saw with Kimberly Crenshaw's introduction of, you know, what we all talk about now, intersectionality, but I think even prior to that, the critique was being made just by the work that women, African and Black women, were doing by creating their own organizations, you know, with very few resources, very little support, but feeling very strongly that it was really urgent for them to be trying to build their collective presence, power, and influence to get their issues on the table. So I take from that, you know, the old adage that if you want something done, you have to do it for yourself. You can't sit around waiting for somebody to come and say, oh, look, something's not quite right here, let me help you with that. They're not going to do that. You're the one who knows what the issues are because you're living them. right? So you're also going to be the one that's going to potentially come with the solutions for dealing with the problem.
As you say, so we've gone back all the way to the 70s. What would it take to finally be heard? What is missing, or what is the blockage? Like, how do we push through?
I don't know, man. That work has been done. The theorizing has been done. The books have been written. The marches have been marched. The songs have been sung, and the poems have been written and performed. I don't know what more it's going to take. At this point, I don't think that it's for minorities to be explaining all over again what the issues are. The people we're explaining to, perhaps they could make more of an effort to listen, to reflect, and to reflect specifically on the ways in which their policies, their approaches, their behavior, their understanding is not challenging the status quo. So reflecting on in what ways am I, if I am that, majority person or majority organization, in what ways am I actually constantly reinscribing the inequalities or the divisions? And what could I do to change that? And it's not, having a diversity box to tick. Because there again, as people have said over and over again, you put the burden on some poor Black or brown or disabled or sexual minority person to come and do the work for you. The work has to be done yourself, whether it's organizationally or individually or on a group basis. At this point, I think that's what's necessary as a matter of urgency.
Wow. It's very precise and very, in a way, it's about for the majority to start doing that work on themselves. I wanted to ask you, you've given little snippets, but what do you think needs to be considered when we're looking at shifting those paradigms? So that work from the majority, not placing the burden on minorities, I'm putting quote unquote, because when you look at world population, possibly the frames are not quite right. What else? We don't mention the economy much. Do you think it has anything to do or not?
Well, obviously, there's a whole literature, even within the mainstream women's movement. There's a literature that tells us that, quote unquote, it's the economy, stupid. If you want to challenge some of these inequalities, we have to look at the economic framework of our societies and not only how that makes us behave, but actually what it demands and what is required to keep it going in the form that we have known for so long. And it's interesting because obviously the current moment, the shock of the COVID-19 health crisis has thrown everything up in the air. And we are seeing that the models, the formats, the approaches, whatever you want to call it, the way that we deal with economics and wealth distribution is highly problematic. And in a moment of acute crisis, it doesn't serve the purpose of the majority. And actually, paradoxically, when the purpose of the majority is not served, the powerful economic elite's purpose isn't served either, because then they're not going to have those nice docile workers who are going to do the work necessary, or the field to exploit, the markets to exploit is no longer going to be there. So I do think that it's very much an economic question. And although, I am not a specialist on economics, I respect highly the work of feminist economics, excuse me, who challenge the status quo and who insists that actually it's not a question of tweaking things here and there. We ought to be considering alternatives. real alternatives. And it shouldn't be, a matter of stigmatizing people who say that, to say, oh, you're a communist, oh my gosh, but la la la. It's not about that. We're trying to look at however many hundreds of years we've been doing things the way we've been doing them. The inequalities are just getting deeper and deeper. So it's really way past time. And the current moment, COVID-19 is showing us we need a different kind of model.
And do you think that we are there at that point of, at that tipping point, that the time is right, and in the next few weeks, months, years, we will see that radical change? Or do you think that it's a little bit more tenuous than that? That's because there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of talk of a new world, but what is your take on it?
Well, I don't think things happen by themselves, right? Change doesn't just come upon us. We don't just wake up the next morning and a new dawn. People have to make change happen. So with all the talk of, oh, there's so much opportunity, this is the moment to change things, then those actors, particularly in civil society, I think, who are the ones who have been developing the critique and who understand the strategies that are required for change to happen, have to be extremely vigilant right now. They have to be ready to hold power to account, dominant power, which is dominant power but held in the hands of the privileged minority. They have to be ready to hold them to account, because we are seeing reactions and actions. I mean, it's like money trees have sprung up somewhere where they've been able to find funds to make sure that homeless people are not left on the street. All kinds of monies are being found. So that means that what is required is a political will for change to happen. The other thing I would say is that nobody who ever had power and privilege ever woke up one morning and said, this is too much power. This is too much privilege. Let me share it with some people who have less than I do. No, the people who don't have power and privilege have had to fight and struggle to get some for themselves. So I think we can't expect that the decision makers are necessarily going to make the kinds of decisions we would want them to make unless we force them to make those decisions, to make those changes. So it's a little tricky because the opportunity is there now, but everybody's also exhausted. The impact has been so big that, even if you're located in some privileged place with your house, your garden, your basement, your everything you need to be able to work from home and feel happy, to the villager in the north of Nigeria with 12 children who's been told to be at home but needs to be out every day because he needs, or she needs, to go and find money to feed those 12 children. The stress is considerable, and the shock of it means that I think a lot of people feel paralyzed. So people who've been working in the sector can see the opportunity in front of them, but it's hard to mobilize with others. It's hard to motivate ourselves. It's hard to find the energy right now in this moment. And I'm afraid we do need it right now in this moment.
So what will keep you going? Because I have the feeling that you're in for all the way, but what sustains you?
The simple fact that things are not changing fast enough, that I'm not, nothing I've said is anything that I've thought up myself. These are things that I've read, and not from literature or articles in the last year, 2, 3, no, decades. People have been saying this for decades. Movements have been struggling for decades, and we're in 2020, and we're still hearing things like the French doctor and scientist who can be on live television and talk about going to test people in Africa because we can just go and do what we like in Africa. The fact that we still seem in so many ways to be I don't know, backward. The enough progress hasn't been made, or that with each generation we have to fight the same battles over and over again. So any change that happens doesn't sustain itself. We have to push for it each time a new generation comes. So I'm just trying to contribute in whatever little way I can to what we're trying to do now. I have a little boy who is 11 years old, so I feel I have to, show him a good example and raise him in a way that enables him to develop his critical thinking skills. And yeah, that's what keeps me going.
Thank you so much for your time, Madeleine. Thank you ever so much.